And then you go, well, wait, that's only 40 billion parameters or 7 billion parameters or whichever model you pick. And then I'm here to say, who cares? Because I'll also over here, I'm going to run a local data store, a local vector store that has all my truth in it. So I'm the one controlling the truth and completely in control about what, comes out of this bot or what responses come out of this. So I don't care about hallucinations and I don't care about relevance. Yeah. And all the data stays within my stack. That is the July 2023 responsible deployment of AI that exists right now.
Well, it's time for the DevCast. I'm your host, Dan Smiley, a citizen developer, and today we have an incredible panel of Portage Bay design developers and a special guest, Cris Ippolite, who, thanks to all of his videos on lynda.com, and shout out anybody who's trying to learn FileMaker, go, I think it's LinkedIn Learning now, which I hate, but lynda.com. Go and find those videos. You'll learn a lot. Cris, welcome to the program.
Hey, glad to be here, guys. I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller, but really happy to be here with you guys today, especially on the topic.
Well, John, how are you? You look like you're back home from your travels.
Back home for a while. Looking forward to 2 weeks in Europe starting next week.
Oh, that's excellent. You have lots of listeners there. Go knock on some doors. Kate, how is California treating you? Is the temperature staying down?
Yeah, it's been pretty mild. I'm doing well. I have my junior developer in the background today. Do you want to say hi, Maya? No.
Is she working on her FileMaker certification?
You could see her. She's laying down back there.
Oh, yeah, she's studying. That's awesome.
She's studying. So we're having a nice quiet morning, but there might be a little background, so we'll see.
Well, that's what podcasts are all about. It's not a studio production. Right, it's family. It's programming family hour. Right. There you go. So Jacob, steely-eyed missile man, the AIS app is up, keeps ticking along without any trouble. So whatever you did, awesome.
Yeah, I'm hopeful. As long as it stays up, less work for me.
Yeah, no. So we seem to have solved our little problem. Where are you today?
Back in California. So back home from my trip to Seattle. So just enjoying some of the nice weather. California, I'm sure you might be up north, Kate, but Southern California is like scorchers. It's been like 112.
Oh my gosh.
Regular. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It's like 76 degrees right now, so I'm just outside and actually enjoying it a little bit.
Yeah, that's awesome. I read that the temperature at the airport in Iran got to 156 degrees Fahrenheit.
Whoa.
That's
crazy.
That's just nuts. So you're back. You came to Seattle. You didn't stop and see me. I see how you are. I'm making a note. I'm writing your name in my book. Joe, where are you today? What's going on?
I'm in Omaha and home. I've been in Omaha for about a week and a half, and I'm already anxious to leave.
Okay.
I need to get to the mountains. It's been too long.
Okay. Well, welcome to the program. Brad, it's nice to see you here today.
Hello.
Where are you and
That's
what's new? That's all you got?
I'm in Stephenville, Texas, which is about middle of the state. We're just off the side of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, so just by about an hour and a half. So it's just hot and humid. For some reason this year, we're borrowing some of Houston's weather, which I don't appreciate. They can keep it to themselves down there. But other than that, yeah, it's great. Life's good, and I can't wait to talk about this stuff today.
Oh, it's going to be awesome. And Russell, you never leave that room. Is that do they feed? Do they send food through that door? Is there like a food slot?
They do. Yeah, there's a dog door at the bottom. I just go through there. Yeah, just enjoying in Stanwood. It's not 112 like Jacob, but we're warming up. It's like been kind of like mid 80s lately, so it's been nice.
Oh, must be
Well,
nice.
that's great. Well,
Yeah,
today's
that's
program is just so often the case these days is going to have a significant AI, artificial intelligence bent. Uh, some of our panel attended the Pinecone Summit, which was a one-day summit held in San Francisco that was attended uh, by Cris. And who else here attended? Who went to Pinecone? Raise your hand.
That was me.
You, Kate. Did you take your citizen developer with
Mm-hmm.
you?
I didn't. No, she stayed with her
Okay.
dad that day.
Okay. Well, it sounded like it was super well attended. Let's just start with you, Kate. Give us a quick overview. What was the Pinecone Summit, and why do we care?
Well, I'll start with, I mean, this was my first AI summit that I had attended, or, conference. So I was looking for something to go to because I wanted to start, increasing my education and figure out, okay, how do we apply this to FileMaker? So I got a recommendation for this conference, and I registered. I'd never heard of Pinecone. I didn't really know what to expect. I got there early, and there was already um, 50, 70 people, or maybe even more, 100 people, like gathered around the block, and people are just kind of standing in these big. And so it was first of all, it started in this kind of interesting, people were a little bit overwhelmed, right? So I think they had a bigger turnout than they expected. It's hard to say exactly, what was going on with the check-in process, and I'm sure Cris can comment on that as well. But things kind of got off to a rocky start once we got through the doors, and that's when they kept saying, okay, 5 more minutes, because they just had to get everybody in. And we can talk about the venue too, which was really cool. Cris, what are your first impressions?
Yeah. First of all, it was a great place to start, Kate, because within the whole discussion of AI, there's actually a really important discussion about databases, which are vector databases, and that is what Pinecone is. They're a vendor who is really the leader in the space on vector databases. Although the co-sponsor of the event was Microsoft Startups, and Microsoft just announced yesterday that they now have a vector search tool. So I would imagine that they will probably usurp some of that lead that Pinecone had. But we're talking about databases. Even though it's AI, we're talking about databases. So that's a good way to kind of set this. But it was a lot of cool energy in San Francisco. I've been to some meetups up there, and got another conference in Las Vegas, AI4 conference, which is a couple days. And just the energy around these things, it's been like nothing I've experienced in my tech career. And the amount of growth that you see, and that what you described as overwhelmed, I think is an important, part of the moment to capture, because people will say, hey, we're going to have an event and we're going to be talking about this thing. And then no matter how many people they expect, it's always like twice as many. So it really talks about just the emergence of this topic in the general zeitgeist, I think. And certainly we were in the middle of it in San Francisco. And of course, Kate did some great Wikipedia research on the actual venue itself. And the name, let me set up your trivia. The name of the conference actually includes the word hallucination. So if we didn't already have people's attention, then we went to a hallucination conference. And what was one of the fun things you found out about the venue, Kate, to kind of tie into hallucination, just for some trivia?
Right. So the venue I had heard was I'd heard it was the old Honda dealership. So, but it was, but then you go in and it kind of feels, it feels like this big warehouse upstairs. And I was talking to Cris about it. Cris like, oh yeah, this is a concert venue. And I was like, oh, I thought it was a dealership. And so then I start researching it, and we find this is the original, or what was, it was original dance hall from, I'm going to get into the hallucinations. This is a long story. Original dance hall in the 20s, but then it had become Fillmore West, which, if anybody's heard of Fillmore West in San Francisco,
Yeah.
Yeah. You know Russell? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
here, right? So it's a very famous concert venue that the Grateful Dead, I think they were part owners of it for one point, and they performed 62 times in this location. The location we were at, Grateful Dead, 62 concerts, and then a conference on hallucinations in AI.
Wow, that's cool.
And ironically, this was about how to prevent hallucinations in AI.
Right.
That's
So
kind of full circle. It's kind
all
of
the
full
world
circle.
came together. Absolutely. Yep.
Mhm.
That's good.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, Kate, how did the conference start? What was their lead in to this
Yeah.
arena?
So I think it was the COO or CEO, I can't recall exactly, of Pinecone, and he got, he stood up, he gave a short presentation on the market, AI market, where the market's heading, some facts and charts about growth of the industry. It's like he said something like, I think I wrote it down, but the exact quote, it's like, this is as big as the internet, and when somebody says something that shocking, it really makes you listen, right? Because I'm tuned in to think, well, internet, we know how huge the internet was. So what is it here that we're trying to grasp? But I felt like, you know, I always go to a conference assuming everybody knows everything and I know nothing. And I realized, we're all I've met a lot of people that were there to learn, that were there to absorb. And I felt like it had this energy of like, we sense that this is huge and everybody's trying to just figure out how huge is it? How do we apply it? Like we know this technology is powerful, and how are we kind of reining it in? How are we harnessing it? How are we purposing it? So I thought his opening kind of went along with that. He wasn't there to say we know everything about it, we know how it works. It was like, we know this is huge. We know it's growing at this rate. What do we need to do? What do we need to do as a community here? And so it kind of had this cool community spirit to it, I thought.
Well, the iteration is so fast, right? I mean, we used to talk about the iteration of processing power over, over doubling over years, and AI is now doubling over days, and in some cases it might even be doubling over hours. And how do you even begin to understand what it's capable of doing? So I completely understand why someone would want to try to get together with a group of experts and catch up, because it's a freight train and it's going 80 miles an hour. Cris, what stood out for you at this conference? What was there an aha moment?
There was a lot of validation there. It was really interesting. Actually, what stood out to me was a lot of the sort of, luminaries and head of NLP at certain organizations and such. The tone kind of surprised me. They were talking a lot about how, there's not a lot of deployment and implementation yet, which wasn't necessarily my first person experience. And so I thought it was interesting to hear people speaking matter of fact about that. And there was some discussion about like, demos on Twitter and like apps that drop all the time versus like what businesses are actually doing. And so I think maybe from my perspective, the surprise came from the fact that all I really care about is business implementation of this technology. And maybe a lot of the discourse is around, apps and personal assistants and the whole chat GPT, which isn't for business. And then that, could arguably be like a consumer product and its adoption is mostly in the consumer space. So maybe for me, it was just a level set that like, there's a lot more discussion in the consumer / app realm than there is in business. But I would counter that with my own experience that I've been constantly shocked to see how many, big organizations are, feeling like they really need to have a strategy on AI, and across the board, they all feel like they're behind. And I mean, the larger the organization, the more confused they are about their position. So, I don't know. I don't know if I shared that same sentiment, but I thought that was my big takeaway. I thought it was really interesting to hear that.
Okay. I'd like to back up a second because we started off mentioning vector databases, and frankly, I don't know what a vector database is. My database world says relational database. So what
Oh, yeah.
is a vector database?
That is so. As database people, we all came up through keys and like index searches, and we really kind of like, that's the terra firma that we count on being there all the time. And vector databases are what I would describe as like this tertiary technology that floats around the modern day discussion of AI, that has been around before what we're learning about in 2023 to be AI, right? But now they play this really interesting role. And so here we are as databases saying, oh, wow, there's a discussion about databases. So first of all, vectorization is essentially, I mean, at its highest level, just the mathematical representation of text. And you can do that at a word level, you can do that at a sentence level, you can do that at a paragraph level, you can do that at various levels. And to fast forward from that sort of, the baseline foundational component of it to sort of this really fascinating esoteric part of it, it actually allows you to mathematically represent meaning. And it sounds super trippy, and it is super trippy because some of the stuff that we can do with it is incredible. So for example, we're really used to, like in our FileMaker world, we do a search, and we've gotten really creative about just going into a field and searching for a word, right? So we know about word indexes and character indexes. And if we get a couple characters right, we're going to find a match, and then that's going to be part of our return set. If we get the exact word right, boom, we're getting that in our found set as well too. Imagine, if you will, if you could just express a thought and then find similar thoughts in your search results, like sort of the meaning of these concepts. And through these algorithms, which are, that's the vectorization process, you're able to actually mathematically represent thoughts, meaning, and concepts. So I'll pause there for a moment before we get into another hallucination discussion here.
So I mean, so when someone's trying to express meaning, they it's inflection, it's it's tone of voice. It reminds me of that. Anybody watch Donnie Brasco all those years ago with Johnny Depp? Right, Donnie Brasco, right? He's lying on the couch. He's like trying to explain, forget about it. It's like, you see it, I forget about it. You don't want to. You think the guy's an idiot. You're like, forget about it, right? It's different same words, right? Forget about it.
Yeah.
Can I vectorize this?
Well, I think that's actually a really interesting point. Like, you could just say the word dude 50 different ways and it means something different every time, right? Well, think of it more about the context of it, right? So like language, which is the core behind language models, which is really what the modern day discussion about AI is anyways, has a construct to it. Right, there are rules that are followed in sentence structure, noun-verb agreement, and all these things that have a start a thought and end a sentence, and all the roles that everything plays there. Those are the rules that the models were trained on as well too, and those are the rules that define meaning. So when we're just straight up looking at text, moving away from it, the human layer of inflection and body language, the words are there and they carry with it their own meaning. So absolutely. And I think it's important that you mention, forget about it, or dude, or whatever, on a piece of paper, all sitting by themselves. They could be plotted in, various different ways. And there's some words that literally have multiple meanings as well too. And so that's why context is really important. But these are technical tools that we have at our disposal. And when you start to actually represent data essentially by its meaning in that context, some really amazing things that we're not used to can happen that come out of that.
So let me try, and this is going to be one of those sentences from the 90s where it's like, so the internet is like a bunch of tubes, right? So this is going to be one of those moments. So just for thinking from a client perspective, and they say, couldn't I just say, give me all the invoices that are overdue? That's all I want to know. I don't want you to have to build a find for me. I don't want you to have to script anything. I just want to type in what I'm looking for in my business system. So does that kind of scrape the edge of what we're talking about taking a thought and finding on it versus having to outline that thought via code?
Yeah, I think that is the use case, right? And the important thing is to kind of map this technology to the use cases themselves. And so ultimately at the higher level, yeah, that's exactly what we're achieving. If we look at like what problem does this solve, it's almost easier to look at it at a more molecular level than the use case. Like, for example, how many times have you gone to, I don't know, Claris community or something, and you search on a term for something that you're looking for some help with, and you get no results back? Meanwhile, there's actually a lot of discussion about this very thing you're talking about. You just didn't happen to use the right keyword to actually hook into what those discussions were.
Yep.
By simply layering in what's called semantic search, which leverages the, you actually take what the question would be and turn it into these vectors, and then you mathematically match it with potential answers. By simply just like turning the dials on, just say Claris community, instead of it being index-based search and it's semantic search, like literally you're making so many more connections and your education is getting better and your contributions are getting better. Like that, like at that just little molecular little tweak of just how the search experience can be changed, you can see an entire community benefit, right? So that's just from a technical and execution standpoint. And then you can kind of layer up and bring it into use cases. And frankly, this concept that I just described lives in the heart of some of the most popular sort of low-hanging fruit implementations of AI today, as we record this in July of 2023. Because who knows what's going to happen next week. But so, and again, I don't want to get too deep into that, but like the molecular level is really the way to kind of look at it. Another way is how many times, how frustrating has it been to like have to manage duplicates within our standard relational databases, right? Where somebody goes to enter in something, whatever it is, whatever the thing it is that you're storing, and our indexed sort of approach to these searches or matches cannot have implied meaning and context to say, hey, you already handled this, or there's already a discussion about this, or there literally is this same company, but just with a different spelling, or we didn't spell Jonathan, we just said John. These are the types of things that help actually, alleviate those problems as well too, and give us a little bit more power. So again, looking at it from a molecular standpoint, and then you can kind of layer up into use case. But yeah, Brad, in short, your use case is a great example of this. Also, though, your use case also talks about just why a chat or a dialogue interface to your applications is a more modern approach to working with data at the same time. That's really my first instinct there.
So this is really going to change the UI, right? I mean, we're going to move away from buttons and dialog boxes and have some other way of querying the database.
I'm a little nervous about saying this out loud. Well, I have said it, online a few times, but just the dialogue interface and being able to have this different type of relationship with data makes me look back on like 25 years of building business applications and go, oh my God, the hubris that I had, thinking that I could just imagine what every user of this system for years to come, I could solve every one of their needs by just sort of like mapping out some layouts and building a couple of reports, and like somehow I'm going to magically get what they want. A more dynamic and responsive experience was always necessary with data. We just didn't have the tools to be able to deliver that to our users. So I literally look back on applications, that we've created and just say, there's a better way to get people what they want on any given day, in the future, even if it's some person that wasn't even consulted when we were building an application. So to me, I think it's a really interesting philosophical thought concept as well.
John?
Oh, the question that triggered for me is one I've had before. It's not directly related, but tangentially to what Cris said. The models that are getting the most press, GPT-3, GPT-4, have I guess I would call them expiration dates or something. They're not current, and so a lot of times when I'm thinking about applications, I find myself stopping and saying, "Oh no, I can't do that. The data's in the model's not current." Was there any talk about that issue that
That's literally the issue. Well, there's two issues. I'm so excited to respond to bring this into why this is so important. So there's really two issues. First of all, the hallucination thing, all kidding aside about hallucinations, it's just some silly term for the language model responding in a manner that is not truthful, but it does so with confidence. And I think all of us can think of a few friends or family members of ours that do the same thing all the time, but that's what hallucinations are. And then the other part is the relevance gap that you just described, meaning that the training set of data across all these models, because it's really the same training set, honestly, stopped at October of 2021. So if you've ever been in ChatGPT and you ask it like who just won the Super Bowl, it'll say, well, I don't know. Essentially, my knowledge cuts off at 2021. So a lot of people evaluate what we call AI right now for business use case and say, well, I can't use it because it doesn't have the data in it. Aha. Well, that is where taking your own data, which I refer to as truth, because the truth fills in the knowledge gap and it also solves for hallucination. There is a way, which is very common, and it absolutely involves vector databases, where you actually take your own data, your own truth, and you put it in between the user and the language model itself. That way, what you're doing is you're dramatically minimizing the role of the language model to offer that truth in this exchange or this query or the information that you're providing. And to do so, that actually happens with vector databases. So for example, like one of our clients has a medical procedure, for example, that didn't even exist until 2022, right? So how can you have a chatbot up on their website that's asking questions about that when that doesn't exist in the corpus of data? Well, the answer is we take a bunch of all of the information we could possibly find about that topic and vectorize it, put it up on a database like Pinecone, and there's this process which is called embeddings. This is another term you might hear, that's tangential to this. So you actually take all this data, whether it be documents or Q&As or training documents, and you turn it into numbers and meaning, and you put it up on one of these databases. Then in the chat, when a user, and this is literally how like all chatting over documents or chatting over data chats work. When the user asks a question, hey, how does this procedure work? Or, am I a candidate for this procedure or something? It goes first over to the vector database and finds as many meaningful matches as it can, not index matches. That's why having this wide berth of, they just said, am I a candidate? Well, it's not going and looking for words like candidate. It's going and looking for things that are meaningful. Like, what does candidate mean? Well, how would I qualify for this? Or, what medical conditions are necessary for this thing to be appropriate? Like, it goes really deep on that. What it does is then it uses the vectors to do the match, the semantic search that I was describing earlier, brings back a whole bunch of sort of non sequiturs of truth from your database that we as developers provide to this. Then it takes that truth and that original question and sends it off to the language model. So now the language model is not tasked with answering the question from its corpus of data. It's actually got the answer and the question. And so its whole role is just make this a flowery response that sounds like something a human could read. And so at that point, we don't need the language models to be super geniuses or up to date or anything like that. And that, by the way, is why probably the biggest news in AI is the emergence of open source models that have considerably fewer parameters. Like there's models out there that have 7 billion parameters that you can run on your own local machine, as opposed to GPT-4 with like, I think they said it was, well, the last thing we officially know is, 175 billion parameters. So we don't need that. We can actually provide our own truth. And the way we provide our own truth is by doing these embedding process and storing it in vector databases that we go check with first before we send something to language model. That's a mouthful, but that is really how we prevent hallucinations and the relevance gap through vector databases.
Am I hearing you correctly that there is also some secret sauce here too? Like you're still protecting your own business's data. You're not exposing that to the world, and so you become the master of the truth, basically.
100%. Yeah. As a matter of fact, every conversation we're having right now on AI deployments is simply around, well, I hear I'm not supposed to put my information in ChatGPT, which you shouldn't. By the way, I'll just make a formal statement that if anyone's out there from a business standpoint that hasn't used ChatGPT, you should, but do it at your home computer. Don't put any of your business secrets in there, because the whole reason it's free is because they're using data to train, right? It's not nefarious. It's just, this is why it's free, right? But if you use the API, that is not the case. However, the API still leaves your protected data environment and goes out into the world and grabs some data and brings it back, and you might potentially push your own proprietary data out there. So the paradigm now for people that care about that stuff is to take an open source model like Llama 2, by the way, that just, honestly, guys, Llama 2 just got dropped from Meta yesterday, and it's basically free commercial use, and you can install it on like an AWS Medium. So everybody's a candidate for running a language model locally. And then you go, well, wait, that's only 40 billion parameters or 7 billion parameters or whichever model you pick. And then I'm here to say, who cares? Because also over here, I'm going to run a local data store, a local vector store that has all my truth in it. So I'm the one controlling the truth. I'm completely in control about what comes out of this bot or what responses come out of this. So I don't care about hallucinations, and I don't care about relevance. Yeah, and all the data stays within my stack. That is the July 2023 responsible deployment of AI that exists right now.
So Llama 2 from Meta, it's not a database in itself, though. Do I need to put my data into Pinecone or FileMaker? Where does the data go that I then let Llama 2 have access to in order to leverage the chatbot's features?
In short, it goes into one of these vector databases, which I hope is starting to bring all the pieces together here. By the way, there is another alternative to it. You can take a model. You can even take, not like GPT-4, but like one of the base models like Text DaVinci 001, for example, and you can do a process that's called fine-tuning. You can literally go through this process and it'll create your own instance of the model, not the entire model, but for practical purposes, you create your own instance of a model by fine-tuning it with your own truth. So you could take all your data and put it up there, and then it would answer the questions correctly. So you could actually like manipulate and fine-tune the data that's already in the data set. You can't remove any of it or edit it, but you could influence it and weight it so much that your truth overcomes whatever hallucinations there might be. The problem with fine-tuning is it's a very complicated process, it's expensive, and also you have to host that fine-tuned database up on like Azure, and like that costs like 50 cents a minute. And so that's for like enterprise, right? What we found, we spent a lot of time in like last year doing just fine-tuning, thinking that was the only way to handle hallucinations, and then ultimately arrived at it's all about embeddings and creating these databases that live over here that you don't have to have your own version of the model. All we're doing is, again, minimizing the role of the model so it doesn't have to be super smart or super relevant, because we've got all our truth over here. So the answer is the language model itself lives in your own network, doesn't have all the intelligence of a GPT-4 like Llama's. I don't know. It says it passes a lot of benchmarks at GPT-3 level, so it can still do a lot of the stuff. And there's a model in there that's optimized for chat. So if you want to do chat, you would use that one. But you are in complete control of your truth. It not only from vector stores and this embedding process I just described, but you can actually make calls to databases like FileMaker, for example. FileMaker could absolutely be one of your sources of truth, or your single source of truth if you want. And so essentially, if you think about it as the question goes and checks with your truth source first, and then gets your answers, and then sends it to a language model to make it flowery and talk like a human, the FileMaker could play a role there too. As long as the searches you're doing require index searches and responses that we're all used to as FileMaker people, rather than this like meaningful thing, that I described earlier with the semantic search.
We're going to call it hippie search, I think.
Well, the responses definitely are.
Like, what data can you show me?
You're like, you know what I'm talking about. Just give me the stuff I need, and like it'll actually do it. But really, there's like, so I don't know. I don't want to talk too much. We got a great panel here, but like these are important concepts. Like I would say, to back out of what I was just talking about, because I'm interested in everybody's thoughts about this here. Probably the number one deployed thing like in production that's actually happening, like in business. I don't really care too much about consumer space and apps and all that kind of stuff from an AI perspective, but it's the chat stuff, right? It is obviously brought into the forefront through Chat GPT, and everyone says, oh, well, I want to talk to whatever. Not talking to Chat GPT, but talking to documents. So this is really one of the interesting things you can do. Like, imagine that you've got a client that has, 40 years worth of documents that they don't actually have like OCR scanned and turn into a database. You don't even care about the structure anymore. You can literally point an entire folder full of documents at this embeddings model, and it'll turn all of that into intelligence that it can store into one of these vector databases. And now you can put a chat on the front of that, and you can literally just say, give me some questions about it. Let me give you a first person example. I was just talking to our retirement insurance guy or whatever, and he gave me this plan that he wants us to do. And so he sent me like 100-page document, and honestly, I had a bunch of questions for him. And instead, what I did is I embedded the entire document, and I've been having conversations with it all week, like literally just presenting scenarios to it. What if I did this instead? What year do I actually get to maturity? Is a loan coming out in retirement against this part or that part? Like, this poor guy, I would be absolutely destroying his inbox, except I'm just literally having a conversation with the document, and that's one document. So imagine if you had thousands of documents and all that organizational intelligence that businesses have, and just layering like a discussion or a chat interface on top of that. I think it's hugely important.
All right, well, let's back up and go a piece at a time. Are you using Llama 2 as the chat bot for that?
Well, we previously had been using OpenAI because, a few years ago, that was the only thing you had. And then, then the space race began, and there's the Google models and stuff. We still kind of stayed loyal with OpenAI, mainly because GPT-4 has this reasoning in it, which I won't get into here because you won't be able to shut me up. But it's absolutely mind-bending, like some of the stuff that it can do and the way it's able to reason and do complex thinking. Then Llama 1 was released into the wild. This sounds like a headline news, like some zoo escape or something like that, right? So earlier this year in March, Meta released Llama. We now know that was probably intentional, because their approach to try to beat OpenAI at Meta is to embrace the open source community. And that's because they released Llama 1 for research purposes only. But they didn't give the cipher, like the code, which was called weights and balances. They didn't give people the keys to actually go nuts with it. Then somebody 3 days later moved weights and balances. So now literally anybody could take Llama and bring it down into their own stack and fine tune it and do whatever they want with it. You don't have to actually go out to OpenAI. Literally an entire community, like hundreds. If you Google, or if you can't, well, you can't get it, but if you Google, sounds so old now saying if you Google something, but if you Google open source LLM leaderboard, it's literally a day-by-day leaderboard of all the open source models that are available, and it changes every day, and they go through all these really fascinating benchmark tests. Almost all of them are derivative from the original Llama model. Some of them are actually trained on their own, but that's how important the Llama 1 was to this whole concept. So now all of a sudden you didn't have to go to OpenAI. You can now do chats to this model, or train your own, or fine tune this version, or layer embeddings on top of it and control your truth. So nowadays, we were doing this one called Falcon, which was the leader in the leaderboard of open source. But just yesterday, Llama 2 came out. So literally, while I'm here talking to you guys, everybody's updating everything to Llama 2 and installing it on a bunch of different client servers and everything. So that's what I would recommend for anybody that's interested in doing this, is start there.
John, are you going to build a Llama 2 server for Portage Bay? Have you built it already?
Not currently.
Okay.
What the insurance example? Where did you embed that data?
In a local store. So that's the other part too, is not to disparage Pinecone, because that's why we're talking about this, but they're also out in the cloud, right? So if you have any concerns about your data, that's out in the cloud and having to communicate through API calls to it, you can also have local versions of the vector store. So in that particular case that I mentioned, it's local. Now, you can do one-off document vectorizations through Code Interpreter on ChatGPT Plus as well too. So it does something very similar that allows you to have these same types of conversations. But in that particular case, it was a local vector store.
Interesting. Well, let's toss it out. Everybody's been listening. Chris and Kate and I have been doing a lot of the talking. And Brad, Joe, what are your thoughts? You look like your mind is going a million miles an hour.
Yeah, just the information that I've been reading about it is I find fascinating. But my first thoughts, actually, I wish Zandon was here because he would be better for it. But my first, actually, I can do my best Zandon impression. I wish I had like a super awesome beard or something.
Oh, nice.
But Zandon would say something like, but Meta, they have a history, right, of privacy and security. So what are your thoughts? I don't know. Well, that's the first thing I think of is, so what was it originally? The APIs were password authentication, and then recently they've implemented API keys and OAuth. I feel like that was kind of backwards in the history of authentication models. Is that what are your thoughts? Do you have any concerns with privacy and security?
I 100% have concerns with privacy and security, which is why I want all of that behind my wall. Obviously we're not circumventing, authentication. We're still controlling user access and privileges to this data. But if I have the language model, the vector store, and all the other components that are communicating with those behind my wall, I'm checking all the boxes, and I'm ready to fill out InfoSec surveys to ask me, what exposure there is with that data.
Sure.
So
that makes sense. Does it, since you're sending data that still needs to be, searchable, does any of that, I don't know, for lack of a better word, scare you?
It would if I was using ChatGPT. Like if I uploaded a bunch of my financials to a third-party non-secure, and I don't say that they don't have security options. Like Azure offers OpenAI access in as secure as manner as you need to achieve, and they are proud of, they tout that. But I wouldn't do that in ChatGPT. I wouldn't put my corporate financials. Like if I worked at Apple and I was working on the new, goggle thing, the Vision Pro, I wouldn't be asking questions about how I would, communicate with my team on that by going into ChatGPT, because now I've just exposed that information to Meta or to OpenAI and Microsoft. If I was a medical company that had, SOC 2 issues and compliance issues on, HIPAA, HL7, I would want to keep all my information behind my wall under my full control, but I'd still want to offer this type of functionality to my my internal users, and potentially, exposed out to the outside world. And when we're talking about then going out to the outside world, these are API calls now. So in the same manner that we can achieve security on API calls and the exchange of data as we do at enterprise levels, or even down at, SMB business levels, those tactics are still available to us to be able to communicate with the cloud-based APIs or the language models as well.
So what you're saying is it's really just about the data model itself, like where you store your data, how you're accessing the APIs, still in the same form of data control that we're currently doing, just with another tool, essentially, right?
Yeah, these are APIs, and for any, and I say that not to be reductive, but to say for anybody that feels overwhelmed by what is all this language model and AI stuff. Well, if you already know how to make API, that's how I got into it. Like literally, I was just doing API calls to pre-trained machine learning models up on the web that were doing like, classification or summarization or something. And I was just doing API calls out of like FileMaker databases. And then all of a sudden I heard about this one that I could hit that was called OpenAI. I was like, what the heck is going on with this thing? Like I literally, when I first started, I'll share with you guys that, I did this Think Week where my Brad, you've met my lovely wife, and she was cool enough to wait a minute. I'm just starting to put this together. She was cool enough with me leaving for 10 days to go out into the wilderness and like just catch up on some like tech like research that I wanted to do. And like 2 days, this is like, I don't know, December, like around Christmas time of 2020. And like 2 days before I left, I got my like one of the first rollouts of the OpenAI beta key. And so I went into the wilderness with just enough like weird. I don't even know what the tech was that was getting me to the internet, but enough to do some API calls and pull some stuff down. And the stuff I was getting back, like I was just doing classification, keywords, extraction, summarization, that kind of stuff. And then I started getting into like what we're seeing now today. And literally, guys, it freaked me out. Like it freaked me out so bad. Like I was having like an existential crisis. I didn't even tell my coworkers for months. Like I literally had like a, oh my God, this changes everything moment. And I still feel the same with that. But at the end of the day, all I was doing was just switching from hitting these APIs of some machine learning models to this other one. And that's all people have to do. If you're not already working with this, if you know how to do APIs, then you're in the game already. And FileMaker is very forgiving as a platform for doing APIs. Obviously, we have API support. We have native JSON parsing. Those are literally the only two skills you need to start integrating into your own systems right now.
Jacob, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm pretty interested in. This is the first time I'm hearing about vector databases. It isn't something I explored. So, just kind of well, on discussion, kind of briefly, digging into what options are available out there. Obviously, Pinecone mentioned before, but it looks like Amazon and Microsoft are also doing this.
Yeah, so Microsoft officially, it was funny because we were sort of chuckling about that at the conference last week, that Microsoft was a co-sponsor of this event. My prediction was that they're just going to buy Pinecone and that'd be announced, but instead at their conference yesterday, they announced that they have their own. They're focusing on the search aspect of it, but it is, it's facilitated by Vector. Previous to this, Pinecone was easily like one of the leaders in the clubhouse. I think what a lot of people were doing even in advance of that was Facebook had an AI similarity search that was sort of all by itself for a while there, FAISS, pronounced various different ways as an acronym, but I think there's another one like called Milvis or something like that too. But then Pinecone has pretty much taken, the role on that. I do think they'll be usurped by Azure services for obvious reasons. I think maybe some practical applications of this might help people understand why it's useful. Like when we get into this semantic search or this meaning, I mentioned before, like just turning the knobs on like a community from a search and finding the right information. Another one that's really fascinating to me that I think a lot of people can understand is surveys, right? So like, and not saying like this is the actual application you're going to use, but I think this is a digestible sort of, thought experiment. So like, for example, surveys are almost useless because they're completely deterministic in the first place, right? Like we have to think of, we are completely leading the witness by coming up with what the questions are that we want them to answer when we're trying to extract thoughts out of their mind. And in most cases, providing them with all the answers. So we're not even giving them an opportunity to say some other thing that might have come to mind when we were asking them this question, right? Sometimes you'll leave a little, do you have anything else you want to add at the bottom? But everyone's praying nobody puts anything in there, because if you have a survey of like 20,000 respondents, some human or humans have to go in there and do their own, organic interpretation of that information and extract meaning from it. Now, today, with vectorization and the way that meaning is extracted from data, I literally had a conversation with a very respected marketing person, and we talked about this, and I threw the same thing out to them, and they said, yeah, but there's no reason why we don't just send surveys out that are just one big text box and people just word vomit into it. And they can say whatever they want. It can be 1 million lines long or 2 sentences long. And then the machine, using this ability to extract meaning in a mathematical way and to find, where things overlap. And here's like, literally, you could have a 1 million person response of just a big text box of information, and using the techniques that we're talking about today, extract meaning from it, rank meaning from it, and literally within minutes figure out what everybody's actually talking about and what they care about without even have to figure out what the questions are. Honestly, that is one use case. Another similar way is job boards. Like I was literally looking for AI talent, which is actually really hard to find. There's a pretty significant talent shortage right now. For anybody that's interested in getting into it, do. And we literally put a Google form together that said like, hey, do you use this tech and that tech and da-da-da? And then like every 5 minutes we think of like one more thing. Oh, wait, we should have said this too. Can we go email those people back? And then finally, I just realized I do exactly that. Just, hey, everybody, you interested in work? Just tell us about yourself. Paste whatever you want into this box, whatever you want. And then literally, then we go to the jobs and we take all the attributes of what a job is and do the same thing, extract meaning from it, and then literally match that to what the talent is with people, and come up with people we didn't even have to ask them questions, and we find out, oh, you're a perfect match for this job. I did an experiment that I think I have a video of on iSolutions AI YouTube, where I took 20,000 customer statements about a product or service that they're interested in, and then 20,000 or similar a stack of, I got this off of Kaggle, like some research data or something from actual people saying these things. But the other side was 20,000 companies saying like what their tagline is of their product and service. And I made sure that neither of them said the same keywords in them. And I was able to match with like 90% accuracy a problem statement with a solution statement. These are called problem solution pairs. And so like that's the type of thing we can do when we can search on meaning and index against meaning instead of against keywords. And I hope with those 3 examples, it gets people really thinking about, oh, wow, we're really doing it the hard way, like everything the hard way, really, the way we interact with data.
This is interesting because before we started recording, I had the thought about one of the things I've said for years when dealing with clients on, what should we program, what should we spend money on, and what should we not? And I would always say, let the computer do what it does best and let the human do what it does best. And
Nice.
now, and which was a great philosophy for the last 20 years. But now we've blurred the line. Like now we have this hybrid human thing that can do some of the things that humans do best. It can do it better now. And so now there's a new piece to that equation. And I'm very curious as to how that will play out, because that changes, like we've talked about before, it changes user interface. It changes everything. Quite honestly, we have to rethink how we want to interact with machines after relying on a 50-year history of how to interact with machines. We're having to redefine a whole lot.
All right, guys. Well, I hate to do this, but we're out of time. I mean, we could do this all day long, and I think we probably should again. But I want to thank everyone from Portage Bay Solutions, and a special thanks to Cris Ippolite. I love your passion for this topic, and I could listen to it all day long. And Kate, I think we should schedule part 2 of this conversation. So,
yeah, I mean, at the rate this is changing, I'm just thinking if we could just go on and on, but even just 6 months from now, it's like how different it's going to be. What new technology be out there, and
it's true.
Really
John's
cool.
going to set up a Llama 2 server, and we're going to come back, and he's going to tell us how that all went. Actually, all of you go set up a Llama 2 server. We'll come back and tell how it's all went. That's all the time we have. Thanks for joining us for the DevCast. We're out.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was cool.
Thank you for spending your time with us at the FileMaker DevCast today. We hope you found something useful, something thought-provoking, and something to take into your own development approach. Things that help you to be more productive and to allow you and your team to get more done in less time. Find us online at portagebay.com and filemakerdevcast.com, and also on social media at FM DevCast and Portage Bay. Let us know if we can help you or your company with modernizing your approaches and streamlining your workflow. We look forward to seeing you at the next DevCast.